The piece Psychoderelict, what's the connection between it and Lifehouse?
Psychoderelict is rooted in Lifehouse, but it's a strange piece. It's what it is a, and I can't do this short, I'm afraid. I can't do this in sound bites. My career was given to me. I was at art school. I was told that there was a big change coming in the future, and it was to do with computers. I went out, joined a band, and there were no computers, but I was successful in the band. And my audience came up to me and said, "We love what you're saying." And I would say, "But what I'm saying is that you're confused and I'm confused." And they would say, "Well, that's what we love. We love this sense of being confused. And we have no language." One of the other things that I learnt about at art school was that when computers came, language would change. So I had these two things in my head. I also wrote a manifesto for The Who, which was based on another thing that I'd got from art school, which was autodestruction, which was that artists who blew themselves up in public would probably be more highly valued than people that went on and on and on and on. You know, kind of a lot of prescient stuff. You know, I had information that I'd got from art college from some really esteemed, powerful thinkers, visionary thinkers, but also I had an innate sense of grasp of what our audience was about, because I'd occupied that ground between music in my family were musicians, and the working classes used to come and see the band. But also something else, which was that I had what I call future fear. I could see into the future, and I could see that there was something there coming that worried me. And anyway, along we toddle. I did Tommy. I did a couple of small mini opera things around the band. I dabbled with, you know, I couldn't do my big idea because we'd had hits, and I enjoyed having hits. However, then I thought, now is the time. In the 70s, I could see that. I thought computers were just around the corner then. I was mistaken, of course. And I thought, now I'll deal with my big idea, which is that what pop music is about, what my generation was about, the success of my generation, was that we discovered a new form of art, and a new form of entertainment, and that it was very pure and very real and very emphatic, but it required congregation implicitly. We had to, you know, you have to be in a gang to get it, and decided to work on something which would create a vehicle for that idea in the way that I had with Tommy, which created a vehicle for my spiritual ideas. And when I say my spiritual ideas, I mean the spiritual ideas that were around at the day. And it failed. It just failed. It was too ambitious, it was dangerous, it was incredibly stimulating and exciting, though, to go through it, but it was a huge humiliation for me. And so then we move on, and around the time that I started to work on Psychoderelict, I'd had a period of maybe 20 years, 18 years certainly, where I had been out of The Who and left the music behind. I'd been working at Faber and Faber as an editor. I'd learned how to structure books and blah, 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 blah. And suddenly Tommy was on Broadway. I was making a load of money. I thought, maybe now's the time I can do two things. I can have a look again at Psychoderelict, at Lifehouse, and maybe I can also talk about what happened to me in that frame and what happened to people like me in that frame. So Psychoderelict is a story about what I went through when I did it, but also about the aftermath. But it also, again, like Lifehouse, looks into the future. And what's so peculiar about Psychoderelict, when you listen to it now, is that in it I predict my own demise. You know, I was arrested in 2003, early, allegedly as a paedophile consumer on the internet of child pornography, when in actual fact what I was involved in was a campaign to bring what was going on the internet to public attention. As somebody who, I'd got a glimpse of the internet way back in 1970 when I was working on Lifehouse. In 1985, I did a lecture at the Royal College of Art, where I did a weird lecture, very weird, where I talked about music downloading being inevitable. Remember that the guy that invented the software, Cerf, his name is, CERF, for the modems that we now use to link us to the internet, the actual way that we turn data into language, that stuff wasn't really available until 1986. The first modems came out of Silicon Valley in 86. So again, I was a bit ahead of my time. I was sitting in this thing, I was saying, there's going to be music downloading, you'll be able to pick up the telephone and music will come and it'll appear on your computer in your room, And I said, but the other thing that will happen is that with it will come a piece of despicable, foul pornography, and you'll open the box and there it will be, your child being buggered by some blah blah blah. Anyway, shocking thing. A load of people got up and walked out. A couple of them came back later and they said, this is ridiculous, there'll never be anything like music downloading. Why would anybody want music without record sleeves? We're artists, we want to do it. But also I realised that I'd gone too far. So when I kind of came back to this subject in 93, I nonetheless decided to kind of embrace what had happened at the Royal College and flew it into the plot that the old rock star has his memory of these great days of rock and roll, but he also has these great days of great ideas, hippie visions, drugs, gurus, enlightenment, craziness, and that anything was possible, and that what he sees as a result of that is a chance to recapture his old glory, shut away in this house in the country. But his managers and the people around him want him to get out on the road and make some money so that they can make some commission. And they set him up using his weakness, which is that his belief that the internet, out there on the internet, out there in Letterland, out there in Fanland, there is somebody somewhere who needs him, who wants his wisdom. I can help you. I know secrets that you don't know. But also the possibility that will provide some kind of romantic night. He's a knight on a white horse. He can help the poor, abused children, kind of thing. And that turned out to be kind of like my reality. So in a sense, Psychoderelict straddles a huge bunch of time. Back to the 60s when I was at college. Ray High is not me. He's a mixture of people. He's a mixture of me, somebody like, say, Ray Davies, somebody like Nick Lowe. In fact, I combined Nick Lowe and Ray Davies' name to get Ray High. Nick Lowe, Ray High. And but also people like Brian Eno and Peter Gabriel and the thinkers, the visionaries. And the people that believe that music possibly had more going for it than just entertainment today. Not that there's anything wrong with that. In fact, to some extent what Psychoderelic is about the fact that at the end of the day this guy is pumped up, he does get a hit, and in the end he still sort of sits smoking his cigar thinking, whatever happened to all that lovely hippie shit? It's a very weird piece, but it was meant to deal with the fact that what was happening to me is that I had a show on Broadway, making a huge amount of money every week. I didn't have to get off my arse, and I needed to look at what it was, how I'd got there. And so Psychoderelic was about that.
I mean, it's not without its humour. I love the line where the manager says, if you must be introspective, please do it in public.
Now, a lot of the really funny lines came from my friend Barney. About halfway through writing it, I realised that, not that I was revealing too much, but that a lot of biographical stuff was sneaking in. And I got Barney in and we sat and talked, and he loved the idea. And he eventually directed the show that we did for Brooklyn Academy and for public television in New York, this programme. And we worked on the script, and he'd go off and he'd come back and he'd have cut out loads. I've cut all this out. In fact, we talk about this. I've cut all this. At one point, we have Ruth Streeting at the end of the play say, he goes, "Yeah, what happened to the truth? What happened to the dream? What happened to?" And she goes, "Right, I've cut all this." Well, that's what Barney was doing to me. I kind of go, it's amazing. One day there'll be computers. One day we'll be transferring matter, and who knows what happens when the glove comes through your TV set and starts to put its finger up. What's it? And he go, "I've cut all that." And lots of his gags too were supplied by his girlfriend. That one about life's a bitch and so am I. That was her saying. And of course, Jan Ravens, who we got in to play the part, turns out, I didn't know at the time, we just auditioned her and she was a natural. Turns out to be one of the people who's at the front line now on radio, and has been for a long time, but the front line of modern comedy of this sort, satirical comedy. So she was perfect for that. There's lots of gags, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's got a lot of... And the direction is a kind of stylised. I know people hold their look to camera as the camera moves away from them. And it's got a definite plan to it all.
It was meant to be a workshop. It was meant to be a workshop. It was meant to be a test. And it went no further than this event. I've never put it on again. It was partly because it was such a sleigh ride. We toured it. We did several shows. In fact, we did one show with somebody else playing Jan Raven's part at Jones Beach, and that was the last show that we did. And although the girl that came in and the last minute, it got better and better and better and better. It started to really feel like a rock and roll event, as well as a play. But it was a workshop, so the idea was originally that people would stand in a row of three, like they would on the radio, with their pieces of paper and read it, and I would have an acoustic guitar and just play along. In fact, we did it at the Mayfair Hotel like that. And although that wasn't 100% successful, because I'd been without sleep for a couple of nights, and we played it to the press, who kept saying, "It's frustrating, Julie Burchill." And I'd say, well, no and yes. Yes, of course she is, and of course she isn't, It wasn't a failure, but that was a small version of it, but I never really got beyond it. So the ultimate style of it, while it was happening, what I wasn't certain about was the visual stuff. It seemed to me at the time that what was happening was that we just had, some computer fractal stuff coming up on some patterns, and I thought, I could do that at home. Why am I paying these people $30,000? But in actual fact, what was interesting about Wendell Harrington, I used them because they'd done the backdrop display for Tommy on Broadway using slide projectors, so it was very organic. In fact, it broke down in Boston and we had to do the show without it, and the show still worked okay without it, but it was simple and basic and primitive. But what happened as we were doing it is that poetry snuck in sideways. There were moments when, the hamminess of it, of playing to the crowd, the hamminess of telling the story, and the slightly embarrassing sense that here we have an artist talking about his own art. Here we have somebody doing, a musical lecture about their own difficulties and everything. That it somehow got lost. It got lost because of the fact that the actors were on the stage, and there was quite a lot of cross-pollination.
And your part, you are almost a fourth one. I mean, you're the kind of narrator by implication that you're saying, but you're there on occasion you just typically touch the guy on the shoulder or you move away. Was that spontaneous, or was that all part of the direction to include you in that thought? I
think I'm clearer now that that Ray High is not me, and that I am not Ray High, and that that I'm nothing like him, and I'm nothing but so I'm the narrator and the author. When I did it, because I was performing the songs, I was inside the songs, which were written in a sense by me as a songwriter, looking at the story, looking at not the story of Psychoderelict, not the very simple story about an old rock star who's brought back to life by a conspiracy, but looking at rock and roll and what rock and roll was about, looking at, like for example in Let's Get Pretentious and Fake It, about how artifice and shallowness and pomposity and pretentiousness are okay if they're supported by the right, the right structure. There's a skill involved in running a new art show. There's a skill involved in putting on a new opera. There's a skill involved in, and that a lot of those skills were not familiar to the people in pop, and neither were they fashionable. It wasn't fashionable to present something in a skillful way. So as soon as pop artists and rock artists started to use skillful techniques outside of, if you come near me, I'll punch your face in, or here's my tits, what you actually got was contempt. But strangely enough, contempt from within, not from without. People without, in my day, never even took any notice of what we were doing. It would be from within. It would be, you can't do that. And so what was it? A lot of the songs, and my role was to comment on that process. It was that here's a good, straightforward, salt of the earth rock star. This is Rick Parfitt meets Ray Davis meets blah blah blah. He's had a big idea. He can't quite pull it off because he's a bit too drunk. He's a bit too rich, but he loves it. He loves the dream, the vision, and he's hearty and he's been successful. My view of it was not contemptuous, but certainly that of a commentator and a narrator.
If you were to revisit the piece now, I mean, if is a foolish word, but if you were to, would it change dramatically, or would you just tweak it? Do you think the story is sound? Would you maybe just the graphics with modern technology?
I think what I'd change would be that the graphic bits tended to deal with reference to Lifehouse. And Lifehouse was a much more sophisticated idea because it involved the idea of musical feedback, which of course now is a possibility. And I have to confess, to this day I still, I'm involved. There's a guy down in my studio as I speak who's working on music which has been generated by a computer, which has been put together by human data being fed into that computer, and we're hoping to get that up as an interface on the website so that people can do that. It's such a lovely idea. So it's one, in a sense, I'm still waiting for the technology to catch up. But no, I wouldn't change it. I think it ain't perfect, but no, I wouldn't change it because there's no need to change it. It doesn't really amount to very much. What it is a snapshot, a slice, really, between two worlds. And what's interesting about Psychoderelict is that it's about celebrity and about the failure of celebrity, but it's also about the failure of rock and roll, as exemplified by people like me, to live up to its promise and its dreams. Not all of its promise and not all of its dreams, but to fail to live up to some of them. And the principal promises were, we are inventing something new, a new process which will lead to something higher, which will lead to a change in the world. And we didn't change anything. So it's that, what we changed was sexual mores, the length of people's hair. We did some good things and some bad things, but we didn't change the way the world structures. We still have war. So what I suppose was going on was that I was looking at the idea that power was shared between the artist and the thinker and the visionary and the journalists, the press. Now the press, I don't know whether journalists would agree with me, but I think journalists they're interested in facts. So when you're an artist, you're not interested in facts, you're interested in dreams, you're interested in things that really genuinely can't get proved. Like Barney was always saying to me, but you exaggerate, Pete, so much. And I'd say, well, I don't care whether the number's 60 million or 60 million, it's just something million. And he'd say, but it's very important, there's a big difference between 60 million and 600 million. I'd just say, not to me, I'm an artist. And it would infuriate him because he was a journalist, is a journalist. And so on the one side you have this empire of power base, Lord Rothermere used to own the Daily Express. I know now it's somebody else. It's Richard Desmond, who's much more of an ordinary bloke. But this huge power base, with this Rupert Murdoch power base, with Reuters involved, with banks involved, and now we have the world in which there's Russian billionaires, and in those days it was the Arabs who seemed to have all the cash. This huge oil-linked linked in with media and the soft sell and the soft stroke of Hollywood and the entertainment business in America, that somehow I felt caught in the middle, and we felt caught in the middle, all of us felt caught in the middle, and Psychoderelict attends to that. It attends to how can we take what it is that we want and take it back. And what's so interesting today is that when you look at where the internet is today in 2005, it's right on the verge of people using the internet to take control of their own entertainment and their own experience and their own exchanges. And as soon as they do it, the people that put the sites together and the people that put the systems together sell it for $2.5 billion or $20 billion or $30 billion. They buy a yacht and they go to the fucking south of France. Now, somewhere in this whole story is the hope that there is a Ray High who might come up with an idea and might follow it through and do something good with it. So, in a sense, the feeling that it was an exercise of power, dreams against, and what happens is that the really powerful one, the journalist, in the end, she wins. She wins. She gets Ray. She can make and break him anyway. She brings him back. She sends him a dirty picture, which is her. And she taunts him, and she gets him to fall in love with her, and then she dumps him, and then she controls him, and and he's just an artist. He's like a child, really, and but he has the visions. She has the facts. And what he says at the end, where he says, I knew all along, actually, what Barney and I discussed this, we said, well, what does he know? If he'd known all along, wouldn't he not have gone along with it? He didn't really know, but he thinks he knows everything. He has the arrogance of the artist. I know, I can see everything, I can see the future and I can see the past. That's how I function as a writer, I'd never read it. I should have read it when I was a kid. I should have read On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Somehow it missed me. There's a scene in it where two guys, they're not taking drugs, they might be doing a bit of amphetamine, they might be drinking a bit of whiskey. Their game is to sit head to head and talk all night until one of them collapses. And that's what this is all about. Letting the idea grow and grow and grow and grow and grow until it kind of goes pop, and you think, oh my God, ridiculous.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Pete.
Good.
Appreciate it.